how there was a drought, and then God himself allowed sage Saraswata, who is considered to be the ancestor of the Saraswats in Maharashtra. He allowed sage Saraswat to eat fish in order to stay alive and preserve Vedic learning. So yes, if the Mahabharata says this, it must be true. And this is the reason why we eat fish, said the Saraswats. Now, they also again, selectively use the Dharma Shastras, the regulations given by Manu and Yajnavalkya. The consumption of meat is okay. Here are remember the earlier portions that I showed you? Yes, so certain kinds of fish are allowed. But wait, Manusmriti and Yajnavalkya Smriti, they prohibit the use or the consumption of garlic, onions and carrots. Now the Chitpavans eat onions, carrots and so you are not Brahmins. Okay, so that was the argument. Really, I mean, it's so amazing. Okay, I think I'm just going to skip this slide. It's very interesting, but we'll talk about it later. Now, in the later part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century, nationalism emerges, right? The idea that India is this nation which has to collectively oppose British rule. So what happened in this time, right? Now something interesting happens. A Brahmin called V.V. Valavalikar, he was a Saraswat Brahmin. Now he kind of responded to the the detractors of the Saraswats in a very aggressive sort of way. He said, well, do you want a strong nation? Do you know how a strong nation is made? A strong nation is made by strong individuals. And how do individuals become strong? They become strong by eating good food. And what is good food? It involves meat. So if you want to become strong and virile and whatnot, you should be eating meat. And that was his claim. Now, if you ask me, what was the conclusion? There isn't any. Because, this debate really, and this kind of, there was a lot of ideas that were expressed, but there was no conclusion as such, there was just, it was really about the ideas and everything, and isn't that how most controversies are? That they really, they just, come and they just go away. They just waste time. And this is what happened here also, that, a lot of space and time was wasted and nothing concrete came out of it. The Saraswats continued to eat meat and, the Chitpavans claim that they do not eat meat. But then, some Saraswats accuse that, the Chitpavans, they actually, they secretly, they eat meat. So, now, let me just give you a couple of final remarks. So why is this important? Why is it important to know about this conflict among Brahmins? So the debate about vegetarianism, it highlights the complexity inherent within the monolithically understood Brahmin class. Okay, so in both scholarly writings and in popular imagination, Brahmin class is this, they are the hegemonic class and they have oppressed the Shudras. And so there's this, sort of polarity that is depicted between Brahmins and Shudras. But there was, considerable sort of struggle for power within Brahmins themselves. And that is very important to know because it does problematize a lot of the assumptions about Indian society and the position of Brahmins today. Now, attention to the divided responses among high caste Hindus is critical in the context of recent controversies involving non-Hindus such as Muslims and Jains. So last year there was, I think a few months ago, there was a Muslim individual. He was killed because he ate beef, or he supposedly ate beef. He did not actually, but that's beside the point. And there was this assertion of this Hinduness, Hindu people not eating beef, which many Hindus did support. But there was the assumption of a monolithic Hindu identity, right? Hindus are those who may eat other kinds of meat, but certainly not beef. Okay, but we have seen, beef eating was sort of a common practice in the Vedic period. And there was another controversy involving the Jains, right? So in the Jain festival of Paryushan in Bombay, there was actually a decision taken by the government to ban the sale of all kinds of meat. Fish, chicken, mutton, beef was, out of question. And the people were really angry. And they said, how can you do that? Because, there's a lot of communities whose, survival depends on the sale of meat. And then, somebody said, you should have visited this city 200 years ago. People were living very happily. There was no problem when somebody ate ate any kind of meat. And the people who live here, the Kodis, right, the native fishermen people, they were welcomed, and people, really there was no problem. But just really, this was Bombay. What I presented, this was Bombay 200 years ago, and there was a problem within the Orthodox Brahmin community about whether or not a Brahmin can consume fish, right? So again, there's always this assumption of a monolithic Hindu identity, but I wish people just, looked at history, looked at scriptures more carefully, and saw that, there isn't this kind of monolithic identity, that it's a complex tradition, that there are many responses within the tradition, and as long as we understand those complexities, we can, better deal with some of the situations of today. So I just have this one, I started my talk with a quote, with a prayer in Marathi, and I'm ending with this thing that I sort of culled from a 12th century Marathi mystic and literature called Jnaneshwar. He wrote his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. He did it at the age of 15. Amazing scholar. And the other day I was just reading, his introduction, and this really touched my heart. So in his introduction to his commentary, he says, addressing the listeners or the audience, I bow to you and speak this with a bit of intimacy. Your heart is large and generous. It is the nature of the parents that they are delighted in the prattling of their child. You too have accepted me. You took me as your own noble ones. You easily tolerated the shortcomings in my speech. What more shall I ask for? So, that was Jnaneshwar, and on that note I want to end, because I kind of have a similar feeling. So thank you. Do I do this for questions? Beautiful sound. Yeah, any questions? I know it's fairly late, but still, if you have any questions.
It's lovely, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
In the debate that is quite politically charged right now about meat eating and the fellow that's killed, and then the controversy over the imposition of the ban during a holiday, which is supported by a very relatively small number of people. Do you see this as part of an increase in vituperativeness in India under the current government and the resistance to the current government?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you see this just as, this is the way it's always been?
Probably the latter.
Okay.
Yeah. Because people generally have the sort of, I'm not a big fan of the BJP, let me tell you that, but people generally blame, they say, oh, there's growing intolerance in India. Well, I can show you several points in history when, BJP was not in power and there were problems. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, this ban on meat was not first initiated by the BJP, it was the Congress government. Mm-hmm. In 2004, that first introduced this ban.
During Paryushan.
During Paryushan, exactly. Now, the BJP has a majority of the Jains as its members. Right. So, the BJP government does, especially the state government, and the municipal governments, they did really want to push for this. But then I think they wanted to do it for a week, but because of public pressure, they had to do it just for a couple of days. Yeah. Because people were livid. They said, how can you just for small community, how can you ban, do this for, yeah. So I think this is kind of, part of the larger fabric. Really. Yeah.
So you mentioned that a huge thing was a stake in being a Brahman,
right.
Basically be participating of this land and privileges, etc. Right. So as I understand, behind this debate is if you can prove yourself a true Brahman, then you have the right to have these privileges.
Right.
But now that that is not necessarily the case. Not just you don't need to be a Brahman to to be rich or to have these privileges. So
Absolutely.
what is at stake now?
Well, so here's the thing. So what happened in this sort of these episodes, that's no longer the scenario, right? In fact, many Brahmins feel that they are now sort of in the minority. The larger dominant caste in Maharashtra today is that of the Marathas. And many of the chief ministers, they come from the Maratha caste, who have a lot of sugar factories and a lot of agricultural land, and they really control the finances, the sugar lobby as it's called, and it's controlled by the Marathas. And then of course there is also the affirmative action, right? That a certain portion in government jobs and schools and colleges and universities, it's reserved for members of the lower castes, right? The scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, as they're called in India. So really, Brahmins can no longer claim this position of superior kind of economic or kind of dominance that they enjoyed. And for many Brahmins, it's a cause of worry. So they say that we have clearly lost this position of dominance that we enjoyed. And remember, my friend once told me that no matter what, the Brahmins will always be at the forefront of all, the entire society. That's how they kind of argue.
So are the Marathas like a Kshatriya Shudra blend, or?
No, opening that question would be like answering that question would be like opening a Pandora's box, because what is Maratha? It's they're not Kshatriyas, but they were they started as peasants, really, and some scholars argue that there was no community like Marathas. There were all these smaller communities of peasants who later kind of claimed to be this larger caste called Marathas. And some Marathas claimed to be Kshatriyas. For example, Shivaji, right, the great Maratha king, he had to prove his credentials as a Kshatriya king in order to become a king in Maharashtra. So, because he came, some people say that he came from a very sort of humble sort of community which was not acceptable to the Brahmins at that time. So he had to hire a Brahmin from Banaras who traced the origins of Shivaji right into Rajasthan to a Kshatriya king, and that's how his origins were proved as a Kshatriya king, and therefore he could become a king. Yeah. But yeah, some people claim that they are Kshatriyas, but then Marathas, they have been asking for a greater share in reservations and stuff like that. So it's a very complicated situation.
Yeah, those of us who are going to India, you have to read the newspaper every day to realize how much you will never know.
Right.
Because this is front page, and there are huge riots between these different groups that break out, where a lot of people die. We never hear about it over here.
Right.
And the Gujars and
the Jats
and the Jats.
The Jats have been also, yeah. It's so interesting, right? I mean, previously the lower castes had this, it was a problem being a member of a lower caste. Now suddenly everybody wants to be a member of a lower caste. They want to go even lower in the hierarchy because it promises this kind of reservation in and certain financial benefits and whatnot. And so even my community, I come from the Shaivite community of Lingayats. Okay. Now I heard from my dad that some members from my community, they wanted to be declared as a scheduled caste, scheduled tribe. And I said, what? I mean, we seem to be doing okay. Why do we need that kind of, really? And then, thank God, the proposal was rejected because we really don't need it. We are doing well. So that's a problem that even when you're doing well, in order to, sort of get a bigger share of the pie, you will just kind of make all sorts of contesting claims. So, yeah, that's kind of crazy. Yeah.
Going along with what happened with Bajushan when, and they ended up taking, animals outside of the Jain communities and eating them and throwing them in the houses and whatnot in Mumbai. This had happened apparently in the Walkeshwar area. So what, because of something, like you said, it's happened in history, but in the present, this is something more prominent that's coming up again as a clash.
Sure.
Do you see, I don't know what happened after, if there was some kind of, there was a little bit of backlash, but it's not like the Jain community really took some kind of full-on action, at least to my understanding.
Right.
So what, do you foresee this as something, do you know if there was any kind of, what resolve came out of that, or if anything was worked out, or how this can continue or get worse over time? And do you see this popping up in other parts of India as much as in Maharashtra in particular, and other Brahmin communities in other parts with other communities, or specifically, I've seen it quite a bit in that area in particular, but are you seeing that similar situation popping up in other places, or what do you foresee as your prediction of what?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Well, Mumbai, it sort of attracts the attention of the entire nation.
It's a melting pot for India.
Yeah, it is a melting pot. It is the financial capital of India, and a controversy in India, in Mumbai, is actually a controversy about India, right? So I think my feeling is that I probably won't be seeing this in other parts of the country, and even if it does happen, it won't have as much media coverage. That's again, I mean, how do we know whether something is happening or not? It's always mediated through media, right? So I don't think it'll have that kind of media coverage really. And there was, some giant leaders who actually came out, and there's a bunch of videos available on YouTube where they defended the practice of their community and everything. So they kind of did engage in some kind of, like a dialogue. But like I said, this is, the problems arise not with the view to get some solution. Problems arise because having problems is important. No, really, that's sort of nobody's seeking any solution. People are just kind of trying to get some kind of political mileage out of, things. Like when there was, like several, Maharashtra, especially after BJP government came in power, it has, banned the sale of beef, right? And beef ban is something that exists in Maharashtra, Gujarat probably, and in other states as well. Now to counter that, some individuals, they organize what they call as the beef festival, which I think was also sort of a distasteful response. Like, engage in a meaningful dialogue. Why do you want to just kind of this in-your-face response that, hey, this is what we are going to do? Because, I mean, that's a problem with ideology, right? Either way, they end in violence. So that's why I don't like ideology. But yeah, so and then just so you know, the beef that is sold in India is not actually meat of a cow; it's a meat of a buffalo. So just know that. And I asked my mom, right, because she grew up in this small town and she's strictly vegetarian. I said, Mom, when in your town cows died, okay, what happened? Were they given to the butchers? She said, no, they were buried respectfully. So that was her response. But then, I know some Hindus who have told me that, after a cow dies or if a cow becomes barren, she's no longer useful, she's delivered to the butcher. So, but in general, cows, yes, there is truth to the idea that cows are venerated in India. They're, called as mothers and whatnot. So it's a very complex situation. Any other questions? If not, we can go home.